Alright guys, Unit 9.3. Sorry for the delay on this. I went back and just re-recorded some stuff that was on my hard drive and kind of had to leave for a family emergency. So this will take us up to modern times, up to the end of our information, other than we'll go back over a couple economic things and Unit 9.4. But you do have this video, you'll have this week to watch these and ask any questions. We'll do another bracket activity for review, but we will start filming tomorrow. And John won't be able to make it Thursday, but he will now be able to make it Monday. So you'll have a little extension on filming, which will allow us to touch base on content, so it will all work out just grand. And I'll change that calendar on Edmodo for you. So Roots of the Cold War, we've already talked about these wartime conferences. The diplomacy during World War II is going to really be the first cause. It's our conversations and disagreements at these war conferences. So the Tehran Conference of 1943 in Iran, the USSR was guaranteed to be the only power to liberate Eastern Europe. Its armies were already there, as we're going to see those setting that up when we at the Yalta Conference, not allowing free elections there is going to be a state of hostility that will arise from this. And so all of these being causes of the Cold War, with some breakouts of hot war for the next 50 years. So in the Yalta Conference of 1945, Stalin will make that pledge to allow democratic elections in Eastern Europe after USSR was guaranteed to be the only power to liberate Eastern Europe, but will later take back his word. Germany will be divided into 4 zones at this conference, controlled by US, France, Britain, and USSR. We believe in self-determination, so the areas that we are taking will get to determine their own government. But after the wars, the Soviets will decide to dominate their zone and not allow the reunification of Germany, because they're so fearful, like Germany World War I, Germany World War II. They don't want Germany to get strong enough to cause them damage again. I think FDR overestimated his charm in getting Stalin to do what he wanted to do, and is really going to set the stage for Stalin to kind of have these plans and not follow through. But then we'll see in the Potsdam Conference of 1945, after FDR comes home and passes away, we have our new U.S. President, Harry Truman. And Harry Truman will demand free elections in Eastern Europe, but Stalin will openly refuse here. Truman's not as much of a charmer. He was only vice president for a little while then before he even becomes president, and his negotiation skills with Stalin are definitely not on par with where FDR was. Stalin wants a buffer zone between Germany and the USSR for protection against future war. So all of these conferences and our failures in them are going to set up for tensions, and then we're going to see that our very differing worldviews are just going to further these tensions. Now, thinking of it, this would have been a great place for a chart. But anyway, the Soviet point of view. The Soviets thought that we hated them, that democracies had always been hostile towards them, hostile towards communism in the USSR. They would use as example things like the Archangel expedition during World War I, our non-recognition of the USSR until 1933. They would say, you tried to strangle us in our crib. You've been hostile towards communism. The U.S. and Britain did not open up that Western Front in Europe in World War II like Stalin had wanted, or as Stalin thought that they did not open it earlier enough. Remember going for Africa and the underbelly, Italy, and millions of Soviet soldiers had died fighting the brunt of the Nazi armies alone until mid-1944. So this is a place of contention for Soviet Union. So this means that millions of Soviet soldiers died fighting the brunt of the Nazi armies alone until mid-1944. We talked about that, 22 million. They were also upset that the United States and Britain had frozen them out of the atomic bomb project. Here we had this bomb. They didn't know about it. Suddenly we're dropping 2 on Japan. They would have liked to be in on that little bit of knowledge. Don't worry, some spies during this time period will get it for them. The U.S. Terminated the Lend-Lease to Moscow in May of 1945. So the food, the weapons, the armament, all of that, but we gave it to Britain until 1946. So we did not cut other places off as soon as Hitler died like we did with the USSR. Soviets sought a buffer zone for the Soviet western border, especially in Poland, so a buffer zone to kind of keep our ideals separate. So on the other flip side of that, where the other side of the chart would be, and I thought to do that for you, is the United States point of view. On this U.S. point of view, Stalin seemed intent on creating spheres of influence in Eastern Europe, which scared us of allowing communism to spread. And the pledges that Stalin broke at Yalta by allowing to refuse the reunification of Germany kind of, I guess, proved that point to us, that he will want these spheres of influence. And then Winston Churchill is going to give an Iron Curtain speech in 1946 that kind of raises our alarm, or kind of raises that color code on warning of a future conflict with the USSR. And so the Iron Curtain there, you would see like anything to the right of it would be Eastern influence, anything to the left to be Western influence. And the United States really wanted democracy to spread throughout the world with strong international organization to maintain global peace. But that wouldn't be possible with this Iron Curtain there, with all of this communism on the other side of it. And so one of the causes we've really talked about is the partition of Germany. Number one cause, we've talked about those conferences during the war. Second cause is different worldviews. Third cause of tension is really that partition of Germany. So after World War II, the USSR, United States, Britain, and France each occupied a part of Germany. You can see there in the side to your notes, there's a division of Germany after World War II. And theoretically, this would allow for German reunification once she was no longer a threat. So you have to remember, like Britain and the United States and France realized that when we had not allowed Germany to have power again for World War I, it had caused all of this mess and hurt the economic scene. But we just want to make sure that things are moving along smoothly. And once Germany was no longer a threat, allow reunification. But we know Stalin is going to feel a little bit differently as those conferences end. Germany was to pay heavy reparations to the USSR in the form of agricultural and industrial goods. So there's that red zone there. I mean, really, the USSR is going to rape their partition of Germany. They feel that Germany owes them a lot for those 22 million people that were lost. Soviets dominated their Eastern German zone. They didn't want to revitalize Germany that could once again pose a threat. You have to remember the sacrifices that they feel they've made in World War I and World War II and don't want that to happen again. So they think that to prevent that, they strip East Germany of much of its resources as reparations and payments of war. But on the opposite side, the United States and Western Europeans believed that German economy was vital to the recovery of Europe. We see what happened when we had all those reparations after World War I and don't want that to happen again. That economic devastation is just like opening a door for fascism, which is what happened after World War I. So in 1949, we'll see a split. West Germany became an independent country when France and Britain gave back each of their zones, and this will be the Federal Republic of Germany, led by Konrad Adenauer, 1949 to 1963. And then we have in 1949 the establishment of East Germany, which would be called the Democratic Republic of Germany, led by Walter Ulbricht, 1950 to 1971. And Ulbricht's communist regime was heavily influenced by Moscow, so we will see this sphere of influence from the East and East Germany, and the sphere of influence of democracy in West Germany. And so with all of this going on, and then now the division of Germany into an Eastern and Western spheres, and our worry about spheres of influence of communism from Stalin, the United States in 1947 pledges to prevent the further spread of communism, and this is called containment. It's based off George Kennan, a U.S. ambassador to the USSR, and it's based off his memo that he wrote to President Truman in 1946, claiming that the USSR was out to disrupt the American way of life. This is a policy paper. It's Kennan's view from his time in the USSR, and he pretty much promotes in this policy paper that we need to stand up and they'll back down. He's like, this is what they want, but they also really don't want a war. So if we stand up to them, we can contain this communist thing. And so this will equal the Truman Doctrine in 1947. And this is really the establishment of our policy of containment that would last 4 decades. So Truman's president, Truman Doctrine. The United States will then give aid under the Truman Doctrine to Greece and Turkey to help these countries defeat communist insurgency. So what we do is we quite quickly put our money to use trying to protect democracies and keep communism out. I believe it's $400 million that we give to Greece and Turkey to help defeat communist insurgencies. And we pledged that we would help any other country financially that was struggling to defeat communism. This will only extend into the Marshall Plan then from 1949 to 1951, when we will not only aid countries who are fighting communism, but also send massive financial aid packages to help war-torn Europe recover from war. Why? Because we believe that economic devastation breeds or opens a door for fascism. So we will send $13.5 billion to war-torn Europe. The purpose, again, to prevent communism from spreading into economically devastated regions while fostering trade between the United States and Europe. So it serves a dual purpose, try to keep communism and fascism out, but also fosters trade between us and Europe, which helps our economy. The result is going to be that Western and Central Europe is going to recover economically. This will be called the economic miracle, and I'll show you just a second a picture of this economic miracle. But what we also need to note here with the Marshall Plan is that the Soviet Union is not going to be quite happy with our plan and attempt to block or refuse to allow us to aid countries in Eastern Europe, and kind of saw it as if we were being economic and political bullies with our use of the Marshall Plan. So you can see that political cartoon here to the right of your note. Here it is on a larger scale, illustrating Stalin's opposition to the Marshall Plan, or him trying to block it. And then on the other side of that, we'll take a look at a before and after picture of the money coming in from the Marshall Plan in Western. So here in these pictures, you can see on the left-hand side is a war-torn Germany, and on the right side is going to be aid by the Marshall Plan. So, I mean, really, the miracle in Europe is that this economic revival will happen due to the Marshall Plan in places that Stalin doesn't block it. This all kind of leads up to an almost hot war situation as the Soviet Union tries to block our attempts to aid with the Marshall Plan, and it's going to be called the Berlin Crisis. So this is one of the higher tension moments in the Cold War. Soviets are going to attempt to remove the Allies from Berlin by cutting off access to the city. Berlin had been partitioned, as you remember, we just talked about, into 4 sections, just as the whole of Germany had been partitioned after the war. So the city of Berlin was actually located within the Soviets' eastern zone, although the city itself was partitioned still into 4 parts. So it was like in this hot zone of eastern Germany, but the city itself was partitioned, East Berlin then being communist and West Berlin being free. Stalin is going to order that all roads leading into West Berlin, the free democratic part of Berlin, be blocked by Soviet troops, and he's going to try to starve the city out or starve them into communism. Many thought that this conflict would actually escalate into World War III, and Truman really had a decision to make when Stalin made this move to cut off or to starve. And Stalin would say, well, I don't have to keep the roads open to the western part of the city. That's not my job. The city's in the eastern part of the country. But it is a war tactic to have a blockade. So Truman has a decision. Do I send in troops? Do I let them have Berlin and just take this eastern part of the city since it falls in eastern Germany? Or do I take a third option? And that third option would be, if the roads are shut, to fly in supplies. And state that if any of our planes are shot down, that would be an act of war, and that would launch us into World War III. And so Truman does take the third option. The United States will organize a massive airlift of 277,000 flights into the city, carrying food, medicine, and other necessary supplies. It's called the Berlin Airlift, so it's a response to the Berlin Crisis. It will continue for 327 days. As I said, 277,000 flights. Milk becomes our new weapon of democracy. Food becomes a weapon of democracy. if you were in this state of terror, the country bringing you that food would be the country, you know, you would kind of look to as your hero. There's even this story of this like candy bomber who noticed like when he had a piece of candy, these children just running to him, like to even like sniff the paper the candy was in, and he'll start to send candy down in little parachutes to the children, because you know they just have nothing, and so yeah, food, milk, our new weapon of democracy. Another weapon of democracy is going to be the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO, and it will be formed in 1949 as a collective security alliance, that's founded in this response to Stalin's act in the Berlin crisis. So NATO, again being a collective security organization, will consist of the democracies in Europe, the United States, and Canada, to prevent against Soviet expansion in Europe. And it states that if any of the 12 member nations were attacked by the Soviets, the other nations would come to its defense. So an attack on one is an attack on all. And this stems out of the fear of the UN not working, like the League of Nations hadn't worked after World War One. It's actually only been used once, still in place, NATO. On 9/11, after we were attacked, we asked the other members of NATO to have our back in going into Afghanistan. But in response to West Germany joining NATO in 1954, so you have all the democratic nations in NATO here in green on this map. The Soviet Union will form the Warsaw Pact in 1955, which is their own organization, and that is all of the nations in red. This Warsaw Pact is really pushed forward by our new Russian leader, because Stalin is actually going to die in 1953, Khrushchev, which we'll get to in just a little bit. So Warsaw is very similar to NATO in that it provided collective security, but collective security for the Eastern Bloc countries, not the Western Bloc. But then, even with all of this containment in NATO, we're going to see communism spreads to China. In 1949, communists in China, led by Mao Zedong, will win the Chinese Revolution. Where we kind of left off with China was like the Boxer Rebellion and all that, but there was a civil war going on. In 1911, there was a republic put in place, just a little background knowledge here. Then civil war between communists and nationalists broke out. They put all that aside to fight Japan. But then after the war, we'll come back and continue fighting, and the communists are actually going to win. The Long March, Mao Zedong won the Chinese Revolution. They'll establish the People's Republic of China, or Red China as some call it. And this will be seen as a terrible blow to our policy of containment. I mean, the world's most populous country was now communist, while we are trying to do all of these efforts to contain communism. So, you know, kind of a blow to our containment. And then in 1949, a further fearful blow in this Red Scare is that Soviets are going to successfully test an atomic bomb. And so that no longer gave us that like cushy benefit of having all of the nuclear technology monopoly. Much of the knowledge necessary for the Soviets to build the bomb came from espionage on the United States atomic program, or spies. And then we will also have the Korean War in 1950 to 1953, right after World War II. So after World War II, Korea will be divided at the 38th parallel. The North will be communist, while the South will be democratic. The Soviets had, you know, of course, come into Korea during World War II, and are going to hold the North as communist. However, they're going to feel that this isn't enough to only have half of the peninsula, and so in 1950, North Korea, supported by the Soviets, is going to invade South Korea, trying to make the whole peninsula communist. The United Nations, led by U.S. military General Douglas MacArthur, who was our general in the Pacific in World War II, is going to send troops to push back communists. And at this time, we're also going to give money to help set up a government in Japan, a democratic government. The UN Security Council was able to vote for military action against North Korea, since the Soviets were boycotting the UN in protest of the United States' refusal to allow the People's Republic of China into the UN Security Council. So there's all this going on in the background. So then China will send hundreds of thousands of troops to push back UN forces in North Korea. They do tell MacArthur not to go near the Yalu River. He disobeys. This is going to be a 3-year stalemate because of all of these troops from China coming in. And as a result of all of this, the Korean War, you studied it from the U.S. history perspective, not a grand time, but the result will be a ceasefire reached in 1953, and the border was restored at the 38th parallel. There's all kinds of issues still going on today. Um, there's technically still a war going on. Technically, this is a ceasefire. There was no truce, there was no treaty, just as, I mean, the war could pick up really at any point, and it's still in existence today. And then on top of that, we have a new bomb developed in this time called the hydrogen bomb. And so you can really tell why there's a lot of fear in this time period. They're called the Red Scare. But the hydrogen bombs developed by the United States in 1952 kind of as an answer to losing the nuclear monopoly. And the USSR will then, through espionage, take those plans in 1953. But it's far more destructive than the atomic bombs dropped on Japan at the end of World War II. In fact, 100 times more powerful. And the world now had two nuclear superpowers who have very different viewpoints and have a ton of tension and have almost exploded into a hot war. And so the United States is going to institute a policy of massive retaliation between 1953 and 55. Under President Eisenhower, the United States policy will temporarily shift to helping Eastern European countries remove communism. But MAD, or Mutual Assured Destruction, is going to be the United States' vow to destroy USSR with nuclear weapons if it tried to expand. So it's kind of like we both have our button. If we both push the button, we mutually assure destruction upon one another. And that leads us into the Soviet Union and the Eastern Bloc from 1945 to 1964, and bringing Russia out of the control of Stalin. So we're going to back up just a little bit, and then moving forward to Khrushchev and some other things going on in the Soviet or Eastern Bloc.